unless anyone's jumping in. No, they're not. So thank you both very much for coming and giving your evidence today. We very much appreciate it. Any questions? I'll notice that you took answers are due on the 19th of March, but you go with our thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
I now welcome representatives from the Grounded Community Land Trust Network and the Antipoverty Centre. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, will you please state your full names and the capacity in which you appear today? I'll start with Mr. Fitzgerald.
It's Karl Fitzgerald, Managing Director at Grounded Community Land Trust Advocacy.
Thank you. And Ms. O'Connell.
Yes, it's Kirstin O'Connell, Research and Policy at the Anti-Poverty Centre.
Thank you. Do you have a brief opening statement that you'd like to give, Mr. Fitzgerald, going first? Please.
Certainly. So Grounded is an advocacy body established to assist the growth of community land trusts, which we see as the gold standard in shared equity, where community ownership is carefully managed to retain public subsidies over time and to scale this upward. And if we want help to buy to work, we must recognise that any increase in income, whether it be by subsidy, deposit, supplementation, or a hefty ACTU wage agreement, any of those things occur, then land prices inevitably take the gains. We saw that during the pandemic with Australian land prices increasing by a gobsmacking $2.7 trillion in just 2 years. So to see the Help to Buy legislation boasting, if you like, that it will help all Australians was a little concerning. And we feel that it may well endanger more Australians than it helps. And this is because of the danger of what it will do to prices on the margin. The thresholds of 850, 950,000 are not only too high, but will signal to developers that they can continue to push prices higher. And we've seen that in Victoria with the stamp duty discount, which after 8 years was very quietly increased that pricing threshold from 600,000 to 750,000. Same thing is going to happen here. We believe these thresholds should be $150,000 lower across the board. And importantly, if there is to be any increase, it should be indexed to wage growth. If we don't do that, we know that land prices will just take those wins. So as our submission pointed out, helping all Australians is only limited to 10,000 participants. But concerning for us is that it's being sold as a housing affordability tool. Would really love to see the Housing Minister and everyone in government explain this difference between this recent phenomenon of housing accessibility and how different that is from housing affordability policies. And accessibility has become the bane of affordability as the music is kept going through these policies. And the treadmill this encourages really cannot be sped up much further than we're at present, as we're seeing with the number of single mums sleeping in cars and grandparents giving up their homes for their kids and residing in a caravan in their driveway. So when we see the first home guarantee and associated policies encouraging 5% deposits as the new norm, this will keep the music playing. And when it comes to Help to Buy, we have concerns that the equity is being lent without interest charged over that time, which is good for the affordability pressures. But the orientation of the program relies on that home buyer selling into a higher priced market. Therefore, the subsidy is largely sequestered to the open market, resulting in further responsibilities for governments of the future to fund even larger sums to enable housing accessibility. So what we'd love to see is an affordability lock in place. We talked about those thresholds being indexed to wage growth, and a way that this occurs in the community land trust world is that indexation is limited to the income of the bottom two quintiles and capitalised over 20 years. So whilst we believe strongly in shared equity, we feel that a decentralised approach with the community holding the equity is likely to get a stronger buy-in from voters. This will see a community groundswell building, revealing the goodwill that occurs in our communities, enticing local tradies, underutilised resources and neighbourhood philanthropists to come together. So we thank the government for...
Need to conclude there.
Yeah, that's it. So, yes, we look forward to subsidy retention being maintained in the public estate, enabling for-purpose housing to gain a further foothold in the market.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fitzgerald. Ms. O'Connell.
Yes, thank you. I want to start by acknowledging elders here on the Gadigal country where I'm living and working and across the continent, and acknowledge that we are once again here arguing about housing on land that is stolen. We are arguing about who gets to do what with it, and we are not centring First Nations people or land back, and there will be no justice for First Nations people without land back. Once again, we have a bill that is seeking to put some technocratic things in place that aren't going to be particularly meaningful on a structural level, piled on top of other technocratic changes that have been made over the past year or so. It's fetishising home ownership, and at a time when we are facing such an enormous housing crisis, this is really just not the thing that we need. We don't have any objection to shared equity schemes, and in fact, they think that they can be particularly useful in protecting people in poverty and on the lowest incomes, especially from losing their home, but that is currently not what this scheme is being set out to do. We have a lot of proposals. I would particularly urge the committee to look back at the things that we put in our HAF inquiry submission, particularly the recommendations on pages 11 to 13. However, I do just want to briefly start by saying that to demonstrate how perverse the situation is right now, I am sitting here in a rental property that is not up to legal standard. I am paying enough in rent as a disability support pension recipient. I'm paying 78% of my DSP, and that would enable me, according to the Commonwealth Bank, to borrow $360,000 if I was paying that on a mortgage, instead of paying it to a landlord who is taking advantage of me and presumably other people too. On the other hand, we have many welfare recipients we work with, and 15% of people on the job seeker payment are homeowners, either with a mortgage or without one. And people report to us that they lose their homes because they cannot afford to maintain those mortgages, even when they are small, on the rate of job seeker that they're receiving. And that includes the cohort discussed in the previous session, particularly older women. So we have this situation where people don't have enough to live. We're being taken advantage of. A scheme like this could actually assist people on really low incomes to get out of the situation I'm in, when we have no hope of getting into public housing, even though we should be in it. And we also have a situation where it could protect people from losing their home. So in addition, other sorts of suggestions we would make to improve a shared equity scheme would be to have a public lender option, so that we're not benefiting banks and actually giving people an ongoing benefit to interacting with the government through purchase, through their pursuit of purchasing and owning a home. We'd like to see a dedicated allocation for First Nations people to try and redress some of that inequity that currently exists. We'd like to see that the 2% deposit requirement be waived for people who are paying more in rent than their mortgage would be, or people who have a capacity to pay a mortgage but do not have that capacity to save, and that there shouldn't be a requirement for people to purchase equity back from the government after a certain time period. That shouldn't be a compulsion. We have a lot more that we'd like to discuss. Hopefully there'll be an opportunity here. But yeah, it's frustrating once again to be in front of a committee that's dealing with a bill that completely ignores the scale of the problem when there's much more urgent, significant action needed. And of course, as always, we come back to a massive investment in public housing and strong protections for renters will have the effect, and in fact, a larger benefit for people seeking to enter the property market and buy their own home than a scheme like this.
Senator Faruqi.
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, Ms. O'Connell and Mr. Fitzgerald. If I could start with you, Ms. O'Connell. I think I was reading in a Guardian article a couple of years ago, you were making some comment about negative gearing and capital gains tax rules. And I think your quote was politicians' refusal to rein in apparently untouchable negative gearing and capital gains tax rules that stack the entire housing market in landlords' favor. How important do you think it is to scrap these schemes that create such an inequity in the housing system, but also that have a potential of raising huge revenues to be able to invest then in public housing? How important do you think they are in the scheme of, kind of addressing the structural issues with the housing system at the moment?
First and foremost, I just want to say that there's the government can spend money without raising more money. We do think that they should raise revenue in lots of ways, but it's absolutely no excuse for not doing what's necessary and doing it right now. I note that this scheme will be funded through consolidated revenue, yet there has been an absolute refusal to do that for far more urgent and necessary investment in public housing. In terms of specific comments around tax incentives for property investors, yes, it's obscene that it's quite sickening to be a welfare recipient, having the government consistently tell us that they can't afford to give us enough money to live or to invest in public housing, and also see these hundreds of billions of dollars being handed out to people who are already wealthy. And that in addition to those incentives, I've also noted in past submissions that we are seeing around 80% of the total payment for JobSeeker going through to rent for the people who receive Commonwealth Rent Assistance, which is about 38% of people on JobSeeker. So we have the $5 billion or so on Commonwealth Rent Assistance, plus almost all of the JobSeeker payment going through to landlords in addition to these incentives. So that's why we prioritise not only getting rid of all of that money being handed out to landlords, but also doing things that will mean that welfare payments are also not being sent through to landlords.
Mr. Fitzgerald, do you have a view on negative gearing and capital gains tax discounts, and that scrapping them would make the system fairer, housing system fairer?
Well, certainly would. The property flipping nature of Australian real estate really has to be questioned, and I think either halving the capital gains tax discount or limiting it to properties that are sold outside of 3 years would be a step in the right direction. But certainly that is the big ticket agenda item we need to deal with, and Help to Buy is it's a step in the direction towards a fairer housing model, but there's certainly some refinements that are required.
The Help to Buy scheme, I guess at best, if everyone took advantage of it, would help 0.2% of the 5 million renters, and some have said this morning that it could actually hurt the rest of the 99.8% of the renters. We have heard this morning some describe it as trivial. Others have said tinkering around the edges. Others have said it does not actually do anything to structurally reform the issues that we have, which has led to the housing crisis. Would you agree with these statements? And this is a question for both of you. Maybe we start with you first, Ms. O'Connell.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add something. Sorry, I'm appearing 90 minutes earlier than I was told, so I've not had the time to prepare I would have liked. One of the recommendations we would like to make is that this does have an option within this scheme, or a way of incentivising or supporting people to buy directly from their landlord as a mechanism for helping people to actually, avoid some of the issues that may come from, moving around the system. And also that we have a broader recommendation around capping the number of investment properties a person can own at 4, with a government buyback option for landlords seeking to divest to meet that requirement, so that they can either sell on the private market or to government. But overall, we are putting more constraints on the issues that you're referring to. So definitely it seems, I don't know if we could directly say it will definitely hurt renters. It certainly, I don't think it's going to offer any help for the 99.8% of renters who won't be able to access it, because it is not doing anything to constrain our existing landlords or to restrict their capacity to acquire more properties and place further upward pressure on the rental market.
How about you, Mr. Fitzgerald? Any comments on that?
Yeah, well, it's certainly not going to help the wider market, but in terms of showing that there is a role for government to have a greater influence in the housing market, we would love to see a system where, for example, government owns a lot of surplus land. They could easily be renting that land to community housing providers or local community groups under the community land trust model, and receiving some income under a vendor finance arrangement that helps the community reduce the sort of pressure that we see within the affordability market. So, it's certainly a step in the right direction. And with the developments in Victoria with the ground lease model, it feels like we're getting closer to a situation where instead of renting the land off our banks through these jumbo-sized mortgages, we could be, in effect, renting it off government, and from that saving a heap of interest, and at the same time reducing some of the vacant land that we see throughout the community.
Thank you both. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Senator Freaky. Senator Pocock.
Thanks, Chair. Mr. Fitzgerald, I'm interested in what ways you believe the community land trust model of shared equity would have advantages over the Help to Buy model as it's proposed by the government.
Yeah, well, already the media scare stories are out there in Victoria that the government's sitting down at your kitchen table owning, 30-40% of it. But when it comes to working with your local community who owns the land in trust for future generations, it brings people together, because we are working as a localised grassroots movement, finding those great tradies, finding people who may have acres of incredible fence wharf posts like I do. I have a neighbour across the road with 5 acres of incredible wood that could be used in housing. So every community has those stories. They have their local philanthropists, and we need Housing Australia to join us in providing some guarantee of last resort for loans and aspects like that, so that the financial sector can have greater confidence in the community coming together to provide affordable outcomes. And when we see what's happening in America during the GFC, the foreclosure rate was 80% lower in community land trusts, because financial planning is embedded within that community structure. And in the UK, over 30 years, the return on investment is not, 0.1, 0.2% like we see with housing affordability policies in Australia, but it was 3.1 to 1. So there are huge benefits when you include the social outcomes, the income distribution outcomes, the health outcomes, when you have a vehicle that helps the community connect and grow together, retain public subsidy, and then reinvest that over time, so that we can become like Sweden, which after 50, 60 years has a huge social housing sector because of government support over time.
And so what would need to happen to this current legislation to make it work for CLTs?
Well, it would need an angle that encouraged and allowed not-for-profit community groups to access the low 2 to 5% deposit requirements. That would certainly help. That would be a starting point. But hopefully Housing Australia is going to come to the party sometime soon and assist from their side.
Okay, thank you. In your submission, you refer to the potential for shared equity under the CLT model to facilitate home ownership in Indigenous communities.
That's right.
Can you explain that a little bit more? How would that be achieved?
Well, in some charters for Indigenous communities, they can't actually sell the land, but under a community land trust, you lease the land under a trust structure. So by doing that, we can help bring the community together to help build appropriate housing in Indigenous communities.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Senator Pocock, and thank you to both of you for coming and giving your evidence today before the committee. We very much appreciate your contribution and you go with our thanks. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd ask that you now disconnect from the video conference and I now welcome representatives of the Treasury. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. The Senate has resolved that an officer of a Department of the Commonwealth or of a state shall not be asked to give opinions on matters of policy and shall be given reasonable opportunity to refer questions asked of the officer to superior officers or to a minister. This resolution does not preclude questions asking for explanations of policies or factual questions about when and how policies were adopted. For the Hansard record, would you please state, I'll just say that I don't have a visual on camera at Canberra at the moment, so I hope you've made your way to the table there and are in a position to give us a roll call for Hansard, starting with Ms. Crosthwaite.
Yeah, we are here, thank you, Chair. Karen Crosthwaite, First Assistant Secretary, Housing Division, Treasury.
Vera Hollenstein, Assistant Secretary,